You ever have a moment in life where you look back and think, that right there, that's when everything started to go wrong? For me, it was the night I brought Emily to meet my grandfather. Now, I'm not just talking about any grandfather. My granddad, Richard McAdams, was the Richard McAdams, the kind of old-school Southern tycoon you read about in biographies. He built a real estate empire from nothing. Started with flipping houses in the 70s, and by the time I was born, he owned more land than most cities. People called him the Land King. Me? I just called him Granddad. He raised me after my mom, his daughter, passed away when I was 11. I owe him everything. He paid for my school, my first car, my first apartment. And when I turned 28, he gave me a job managing one of the family's smaller real estate funds, more of a test than a gift. Then came Emily. I met her at a charity fundraiser. She was charming, not fake charming. The real kind that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. Beautiful, smart, and funny in that dry, clever way. She wasn't intimidated by me, or by the McAdams name. That should have been a red flag. Instead, it felt refreshing. We were married after a year. Small ceremony, per her request. Let's keep it about us, she said. I liked that. She said all the right things. She made me feel like maybe, just maybe, someone loved me, not my last name. It was about 6 months after the wedding when I brought her to my grandfather's estate. We were invited for dinner. Granddad lived in a mansion just outside Charleston, perched on a hill with oak trees that looked like they'd been there since the Civil War. I hadn't been home in a while, so I figured it was time for the two of them to spend some real time together. She was my wife, after all. Dinner was strange. Emily wasn't nervous. She dressed perfectly, not too showy, not too casual. She knew how to work a room, even if that room was just me and an 84-year-old billionaire. Granddad was in one of his sharper moods that night, sipping his scotch and making sly remarks like he always did. But he kept looking at her. Not in a creepy way. Just interested, watching her too closely, asking her questions he didn't usually ask my past girlfriends, about her family, her interests, her views on money. She answered them like she'd been preparing for it. And then, somewhere between dessert and nightcap, he smiled. Not just any smile. The kind of grin he used to give his competitors before he gutted them in a deal. He leaned back in his leather chair and said, "You married well, son." Emily smiled back and said, "So did I." At the time, I laughed. Now, I wish I had thrown my drink in her face. After that dinner with Granddad, things changed, but not all at once. At first, it was subtle. Emily started asking more about him. Did your grandfather always live alone? Why didn't he ever remarry? Does he really still handle the estate himself? It didn't feel strange at first. I mean, sure, he was a fascinating guy. Old school charisma, sharp as ever despite his age. But her curiosity became frequent. Then came the visits. She started stopping by Granddad's estate on her own. I didn't think much of it the first few times. He invited me, she'd say. He said he was lonely and liked having someone to talk to. And honestly, that made sense. I'd been so caught up managing one of the newer development projects outside of Greenville that I hadn't visited in weeks. If she was taking the time to connect with him, I figured that was a good thing. He really likes you, I told her one night while we were getting ready for bed. She smirked at her reflection in the mirror. Of course he does. I know how to charm old men. I laughed. I thought it was a joke. But then I started noticing the little things. The changes. She started dressing nicer, more deliberate, like she was going to a formal dinner just to drop off a bottle of wine or check on the roses. She wore perfume she never wore around me. And her phone? Suddenly always face down, notifications silenced. I asked her once, "Why don't you ever answer your phone when I call?" She shrugged, said she hadn't noticed. Said it was probably just on silent. I didn't want to be that guy. The jealous husband sniffing around every corner. My parents' marriage was full of suspicion, and I'd sworn I'd never be like that. I believed that trust meant letting go of control. I believed in her, until I stopped believing in what I was seeing. One Saturday, she told me she was going to Charleston to check in on Granddad. I told her I'd come too. Her face froze for just a second. A tiny second, but I caught it. "Oh," she said, "I already told him I was coming alone. I think he just wants to talk privately. It's probably about some famille." Why estate stuff? He didn't call me, I replied. She smiled and said, maybe he trusts me more. That hit harder than I let show. She left around 11 a.m. I waited till noon, then called Granddad's landline. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. By the third call, I was already sweating. I didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to be the guy who doubted his own wife, or his own grandfather. But by 1 p.m., I was already on the road. I drove the 2 hours to Charleston without a single song playing. Just the sound of tires eating pavement and my heart thumping in my throat. By the time I reached the estate, her car was parked out front. Granddad's too, but no one answered the door. I didn't knock twice. I used the key Granddad gave me years ago. I'll never forget the sound. Muffled laughter, and then silence. I moved through the house slowly, my legs heavy like they didn't want to know the truth. But my mind already did. And then I heard her voice. From his bedroom, soft, teasing, laughing. That laugh used to be mine. I didn't open the door right away. I just stood there in the hallway, paralyzed, staring at that old wooden door like it was some kind of gate to hell. I could still hear their voices, muffled through the thick oak panels. Hers was light, playful. His, low, smug, familiar. My stomach twisted. I wanted to believe they were just talking. That maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was just how it sounded. But then I heard it. The bed creaked. Not once. Rhythmic. Repeated. Then she moaned. Quiet. Just once. But enough. I didn't move. Couldn't. Every part of my body went still except for my chest, heaving like I'd run a marathon. My brain was already racing, trying to make sense of something that had no logic. My wife. My grandfather. It didn't compute. There was no framework in my head where that made sense. This man. This father figure. This legend I'd admired all my life. And this woman, who said she loved me, who stood in front of me and my friends and swore vows with tears in her eyes. They were in bed together. Right there, 10 feet from where I stood. I didn't scream, didn't kick the door in, didn't break anything. Instead, I turned around and walked down the hall. I made it out to the front porch before my legs gave out. Sat down on the steps like some kid waiting for the school bus. Except I wasn't waiting for anything, I just couldn't breathe. I didn't cry, not then. I just stared at the yard. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and for a second I hated them for how peaceful they looked. After about 20 minutes, the front door opened. Emily stepped out first. She was adjusting her blouse, brushing her hair back, looking casual, like she'd just been helping Granddad with some papers. But the second her eyes met mine, the color drained from her face. She stopped, blinked. You're here? I stood up slowly. Yeah, I said. My voice sounded far away. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she faked a smile. He called me to go over some property stuff. I told you, remember? Behind her, Granddad appeared in the doorway. His face didn't change much. He didn't look ashamed, didn't even seem surprised. He just looked at me with that same smug expression he'd given every man who underestimated him in a business deal. Son, he said, like nothing happened. Didn't expect you. I looked between them. Neither of them spoke. Neither tried to explain. I nodded, and I walked to my car. That's the part one still think about sometimes. I didn't explode, didn't fight. I just left. Because somewhere inside, I knew if I stayed, I'd never come back from what I might do. I drove straight home without saying a word to anyone. No music, no calls, just silence and the dull hum of the tires on the road, like static in my skull. When I got to the house, I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. Hands on the steering wheel. Engine off. I didn't even cry. I just sat there, waiting for the anger to hit me full force, but it never really came. Instead, it was this deep, bone-tired disappointment. Like something in me had shut off permanently. She came home later that night, acting like everything was normal. I heard her car pull in just after 8. She walked through the door in her usual calm, graceful way, wearing the same blouse she'd been adjusting on the porch. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my glass of water. She froze when she saw me. I didn't think you'd be back so soon. You didn't think I'd know, I replied. She didn't answer. I looked up at her. How long? Still silence. Emily, I said, my voice flat. How long has this been going on? Her lip trembled, just for a second. Then she straightened her posture and said, I don't think it matters. She said it like it was some line from a breaku P scene in a movie. Like we were just two people who fell out of love. But this wasn't that. This wasn't forgetting an anniversary or growing apart. This was betrayal on a level one didn't even know existed. With my grandfather, I said, standing now. The man who raised me. You realize that's not just cheating, right? That's a whole different kind of twisted. I didn't plan for it to happen, she whispered. He listened to me. He made me feel understood. I laughed. I actually laughed. You married into a legacy, I said. And when you realized the grandson didn't come with the same power as the king, you just upgraded. It wasn't like that, wasn't it? I interrupted. You wore perfume for him. You lied to me. You went back there again and again. She opened her mouth like she wanted to explain, but there was nothing she could say. I need you out of the house, I said finally. Tonight. Where am I supposed to go? To hell, for all I care. I walked past her and into the bedroom. Packed a bag for myself, actually, just enough for a few nights. I couldn't stay. Every wall in that house suddenly felt like it was closing in. On my way out, I paused by the door. Did he offer you anything? I asked. She looked confused. Money? Property? A promise to take care of you after I'm gone? She didn't answer. That was all I needed. Because now it wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. And that meant I could play, too. I didn't sleep that night. I checked into a small business hotel just off the interstate. The kind of place you stay in during road trips or divorces. I stared at the ceiling most of the night, running through everything in my head like a crime scene. Every memory, every conversation, every touch that now felt fake. But eventually, something snapped into place. If they were going to turn my life into a chessboard, then fine, I'd play. I just wasn't going to lose. The next morning, I met with someone I hadn't seen in years, Michael Green, my old college roommate. Now an attorney who specialized in quietly dismantling people, as he liked to put it. I didn't give him the details at first. Just told him I needed help removing someone from my life without setting fire to my own future. He raised an eyebrow. Is this about Emily? I nodded. And my grandfather. His eyebrows shot up, but he didn't say anything. Just leaned forward and asked, how deep do you want to go? I stared at him for a second. All the way, I said. Here's what most people didn't know. My grandfather, for all his wealth and swagger, was still very old school when it came to how the estate was managed. No prenups, no financial advisors. Most of his properties and assets were still held under his name or in family trusts, many of which I had partial control over due to recent restructuring. He didn't think I paid attention during those meetings. He was wrong. I spent the next 3 weeks laying bricks for my revenge. Quietly, precisely. First, I had Michael start the paperwork for divorce. We moved fast because we could. There were no kids, and almost everything we shared was under my name. Emily didn't know it yet, but once the papers hit, she'd walk away with nothing. She didn't work, never had to. I gave her a lifestyle, and she used it to crawl into another man's bed. My grandfather's bed, but I didn't stop with her. I started digging into Granddad's estate documents, looking for leverage. Anything I could use to put pressure on the old man without going nuclear, yet. That was the key. I didn't want a scandal. I wanted him cornered, quietly. Then, a week later, I found it. Buried in the trust paperwork was a clause, an old one, that stated any breach of fiduciary responsibility involving impropriety with a family member's spouse could result in temporary freezing of trustee access pending review by legal counsel. It had been written decades ago to protect the estate from gold diggers. He never imagined it would apply to him. With Michael's help, we initiated a freeze on 3 of Granddad's primary trust accounts. The move didn't go unnoticed. A day later, I got a call. His assistant, Mr. McAdams, would like to speak with you. I said nothing. Then, 30 minutes later, Granddad called me himself. First time since I walked out of that house. Son, he said calmly, this little stunt. I cut him off. This isn't a stunt. It's the beginning. A long pause. You don't want to do this. No, you didn't want to think I'd ever fight back. He exhaled hard. Emily's the one who made the first move. You think I chased her? I don't care, I said. She was my wife. You were my blood. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. And now I'm going to take everything you value. Your control, your reputation, and most importantly, her. because she wasn't going to stay with him once the money dried up. I knew Emily. She married into this family for a reason. She didn't just betray me. She invested in him, thinking he'd outlive me, thinking she was trading up. What she didn't realize, she bought stock in a sinking ship. You can tell a lot about people when the money slows down. Emily wasn't any different. By the end of the 4th week, she started calling me. First it was once, then twice, then 3 times in one afternoon. I didn't answer, not once. I knew what it was. Granddad must have told her about the trusts being frozen, about his accounts getting flagged, about the lawyers circling like vultures. And she knew, deep down, she knew, everything she thought she secured was suddenly in jeopardy. That weekend, she showed up at my office. She walked in like nothing had happened, wearing a tight blouse and those same crocodile tears she wore when she told me she loved me on our wedding day. I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. Look, she started, voice soft, eyes watery. I made a mistake. A horrible one, but I need you to understand, I never meant for any of this to happen. You mean you didn't mean to get caught? She looked like I'd slapped her. No, she said, shaking her head. It was stupid. I wasn't thinking clearly. Your grandfather, he manipulated me. I laughed so loud it echoed in the office. Emily, you knew what you were doing. Don't act like you tripped and fell into his bed. You planned this. Tears were falling now, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I'm broke, she finally whispered. He said things would be taken care of, that I'd have a place, money, but now, he's locked out of everything. His lawyers won't return my calls. His credit cards are frozen. And he's been snapping at me every time I ask a question. I looked at her for a long second. So you came to me. She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. You thought you'd keep your foot in both worlds. Make me your fallback plan in case the old man started circling the drain. Please, she said, can we talk? Just us. I'm sorry, all right? I just want to explain. You already did, I cut in. Every lie, every dress you wore to his house, every, I'll be home late, that was the explanation. And you know what? You can keep him. Her voice cracked. He doesn't even want me anymore. Good, I said, standing up. Then I hope you two enjoy each other in whatever bitter, empty version of hell you've created. That night, Granddad called me again. Not angry this time, not smug, just tired. Whatever you're doing, he said, voice gravelly, you've made your point. I didn't say anything. He continued, you've frozen my assets, humiliated me in front of my partners, and now I've got my lawyers questioning my credibility. Is this really what you want? No, I said. What I wanted was to live my life with someone who loved me and to look up to the man who raised me. But you both killed that. Another pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. I'm dying. I froze. What? Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I've got maybe 6 months, give or take. He let that hang in the air for a moment. Thought you should know. I stared at the wall. My stomach twisted. I didn't know what to say. But that doesn't change what happened, he added. You're still my blood, but I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just an understanding. I understand, I said coldly. You chose her over me. No, he replied. I chose myself. I always have. And for once, that felt honest. Granddad died 4 months later. He never called again after that last conversation. I didn't visit, didn't send flowers. I just waited for the call I knew would come. And when it did, it came from his lawyer, not from Emily. He passed away in his sleep, in the same Charleston estate where I once imagined bringing my kids one day. Peacefully, they said, alone. He left no letter, no final words, just a last will and testament, typed and notarized, with cold legal precision. The family gathered in a dark paneled office 2 weeks after the funeral. I walked in last. Emily was already there, sitting front and center, dressed in all black, pretending to look solemn. But I saw her foot tapping. She was nervous. The lawyer, an older man who'd been in the family's circle since I was a kid, cleared his throat and began reading the will. Formalities, small distributions, donations to charities. Then he got to the part everyone was waiting for, the estate. To my grandson, who I raised as my own, the lawyer read, I leave the entirety of my real estate holdings, trust accounts, liquid assets, and the title to the Charleston property. Emily turned pale. She sat completely still, like the words hadn't sunk in yet. To Emily McAdams, the lawyer continued, eyes skimming down the page, I leave. Nothing. There was no mistaking the silence in the room. A thick, brutal silence that wrapped around her like a noose. Emily finally spoke. What? Her voice cracked. That can't be right. The lawyer, without emotion, handed her a sealed envelope. He left you a letter. She opened it right there, hands trembling. I didn't look over. I didn't need to. I'd already read my copy days earlier. But I knew exactly what it said. Emily, I should have known better. You were never in love with my grandson. You were in love with the empire. I don't blame you. People like you always circle men like me in my bloodline. But I do regret what I let happen. For the betrayal. For the humiliation I caused. For what I did to someone who still called me family when I deserved the opposite. You may have played the game well, but I created the board. Goodbye, Richard McAdams. Outside the law office, she caught up to me in the parking lot. Tears in her eyes, shaking. He left me nothing, she said, like it still hadn't hit her. Because you gave him nothing but lies, I replied. Same as you gave me. She reached out to touch my arm. Please. Just tell me what I'm supposed to do now. I looked at her, and for the first time in months, I felt nothing. I don't care. And I meant it. A month later, I sold the Charleston estate. I donated half the proceeds to a foundation that helped single fathers rebuild after divorce, quietly, anonymously. The rest, I invested back into the business Granddad gave me control of, restructuring it, cleaning house. The name, McAdams, would stand for something different now. Not wealth, not ego, but resilience. And me? I moved into a smaller place. Closer to the coast. Quieter. Nobody knew my name there, and I liked it that way. Some nights I'd sit out on the porch with a drink and just listen to the wind blow through the trees. I didn't think about Emily. I didn't even think about Granddad. I thought about the peace that comes after the storm. Not revenge, not justice, just silence. And finally, freedom.